We love watches because when they're right, we are delighted. It's a little bit like a summer fling. And you go, it's just for the summer. You go, yeah, it's just for the summer. And then somewhere along the line in the middle of August, you're like, I don't really want to leave.
Welcome to Dialed In. I'm here with John Mayer, who, if you're into music, needs no introduction. If you're into watchmaking, he also needs no introduction. John, welcome.
Thank you.
We're here to talk about a very iconic movement, or complication, I guess,
yes.
The Perpetual Calendar, which is possibly the most complicated of production watch movements that you can possibly...
It's up there. I mean, it's the most well-rounded, complicated watch. They get more esoteric, so you could say they get a little more complicated, but in terms of being known as the kind of benchmark of a complication, I think the Perpetual Calendar is widely accepted as the baseline of a complicated watch. Yeah.
Invented by the sexy-sounding Thomas Mudge back in 1762.
It's another Mudge creation.
Where is Thomas Mudge now? So the Perpetual Calendar is possibly the most complicated movement in terms of giving you information. It's like a supercomputer.
Yes, in terms of equating time and visualizing time, there's nothing more kind of complete than a perpetual calendar, because you're looking at not just the year, but theoretically 4 years in a lunar cycle. So the elements that make a perpetual calendar are the day of the week, the numbered day of the month of the year, a moon phase, and then a leap year indicator, which guarantees that you don't have to set the watch for 100 years.
Provided you keep it wound.
Yes, that is... Keeping it wound is the associated headache, or maybe involvement owning...
The engagement.
The engagement of owning a perpetual calendar.
And technically, if I'm not mistaken, a perpetual calendar kept wound will tell all of those correct details until March the 1st, 2100.
Yes, that is every 100 years. This gets a little complicated, no pun intended. Every 100 years, you have to compensate for the fact that a 4-year leap year cycle is not exactly on the dot. It's a little bit longer. Mm-hmm. So at 100 years, there is no fourth leap year. Now, this is not a problem for the watch. You just have to reset it. But watchmakers are looking at this from a very engineered-based perspective of how long could you keep your hand off the watch.
Right.
On the 100th year, if we are also lucky to have 100 years between the time you acquire a perpetual calendar and the time you need to set it again, you would just have to take out, or have a handler, I assume at that point, take out a stylus and just take you past the leap year indicator. Unless I'm wrong, but I don't think so. So I think the measure of a QP is how long could you keep your hands off the watch. But I don't believe you have to take it in to get reset in any way. But in 100 years, you would have to touch the watch.
And that's because there is no February 29th, 2100.
There can't be a February 29th, 2100, because we need to take back that leap year every 100 years to make up for the infinitesimally small increment that goes past every 4 years of a leap year.
But the good thing is that March the 1st, 2100 is actually a Monday.
Oh, thank you.
Checked. So the stores should be open for any collectors.
I have a dinner at Baldi's that night. It's in my calendar.
Now, when you talk about perpetual calendars, one of the foremost names that you talk about is Audemars Piguet.
Yes.
And you've had a relationship with Audemars Piguet for quite a while, right?
For about 10 years now. I will say the way in which I was onboarded into the world of perpetual calendars was Patek Philippe, who very well known for doing fantastic perpetual calendars, the 5970, 5270, being the two most recent. But what really interests me about the AP is the Royal Oak perpetual calendar. It's a lot less rare to find a round-cased perpetual calendar Audemars Piguet. But what really I find intriguing is the sportiness of the Royal Oak case with the elegance of a QP movement. That I think, and I will cop to not being an across-the-board perpetual calendar lover. I love the contrast of that movement in a Royal Oak case. So consider me a Royal Oak perpetual calendar guy.
But it's interesting that the perpetual calendar is, as a grand complication, would normally push brands to make things that are very classic, whereas the Royal Oak is very not classic. And it's that mashup that appeals.
That's what I love. I love contrast. I mean, if you look at the Royal Oak Offshore, what really brought me into the brand, because at that time I was, had some very complicated luxury watches, the high-low mix, as I call it, of a Royal Oak Offshore rose gold, case of a watch, and then connected to these rubber sporty straps. That was the first time I really came into contact with that AP contrast between high watchmaking and kind of rugged, sporty living.
Right.
And to me, in my lifestyle, that actually fit. I mean, I started collecting when I was 25 years old. So if I was going to own a Perpetual Calendar, I'd have to kind of co-opt it stylistically from a different culture of watchmaking, right? So I'd be wearing something that effectively a banker would be wearing, you know? And so the Royal Oak was a way of kind of making a watch feel as if it fit with my lifestyle, of a younger lifestyle. Although I'm a huge fan of misappropriating, quote unquote, watch culture and taking this boardroom aesthetic of a 3970 Patek Philippe, hold for insert, and saying, no, I'm wearing this with a hoodie and jeans, and that's what life's going to be. But at the time in my life where I was a young collector, and I was one of the few young collectors in the world, it was nice to see a Royal Oak kind of speak to me that way, like, oh, this is luxury watchmaking, but it feels like it's more for me in my lifestyle.
Now, very recently you were named Creative Conduit for Audemars Piguet. That's a job title I have never heard.
That's a new job title.
I feel like it's one that was created just for you.
It was.
What does it entail in terms of working with Audemars Piguet?
So the conversation came up about wanting to do more just past this limited edition collaboration, which I was glad for, because there was this moment, it's a little bit like a summer fling. And you go, it's just for the summer. You go, yeah, it's just for the summer. And then somewhere along the line in the middle of August, you're like, I don't really want to leave, And I think we both had this feeling of like, we should keep this going. And I think the conversation started to pick up around being a translator between the brand and collectors and vice versa. Because I am somewhere between a company man and a consumer. Always have been.
But also somewhere in between is what you were just saying about, you would wear a T-shirt and jeans with a very high complication watch. That is very much the sort of new frontier of
yes, it is.
watchmaking at this level.
It is, because I think a lot of watchmaking at this level used to be reserved for the upper echelon of age and status and stature, really. And in the last 15 years, it's really been democratized in a way that I find really exciting. I mean, as much fun as it is to wear a watch you think should have belonged to a Swiss banker, it's nice to have things that feel as if they were geared towards you in the first place, So I will always be a consumer. I like consuming things. I like buying things and opening them and seeing how different the product is from sort of intentionality of telling me about the product. I'm curious. I'm sort of infinitely curious about stuff. And I think through collecting and sometimes just voraciously consuming stuff, not in a materialistic way, but again, like it could be anything. If I get my head around it, I go, all right, let's mess around with it.
At what point does that consuming, where you really get under the skin of something, become creating?
When you have done it long enough that you begin to pick up the consistent qualities that excite you. What are the things that feel really good? What are the things you thought felt good but fell off in a week, fell off in a month? What are the elements of design that you can start trusting over 15, 20 years of experience are actually evergreen? What excitement is this quick burst of excitement that's only in the moment? And how do you learn to identify that and go, neato, but not buy something? How do you separate liking something from buying it? I remember realizing in my life that I was buying things as a way of upvoting them. Wow, that's an unbelievable looking varsity jacket, therefore I shall own it, as a way of upvoting it. And over the years and with experience of learning, like, what holds on over the years, even things I've designed. I've designed some really short-lived stuff. So one of the trade-offs of getting older is that you have some wisdom, so to speak, in what you're going to like next week, as opposed to what is intoxicating you right now. And that just takes a lot of letdowns, right? I mean, and what are the things that we keep wearing? What are the watches you keep going back to? And why do you keep going back to them? You know, so at a certain point, when I started to collaborate on stuff, other people started to really want it. And that wasn't that long ago. I was still making things.
You were very conscious of that shift.
Not while I was designing these things, but when I started to see them come out and people respond to them. Like this line of guitars I have with PRS, there's a real solid sense of what's going on in it. I could not have done that when I was 28 years old. You know, in fact, the very first guitar I ever designed had 2 stripes going down it. You know, and that's not going to last. But you don't know it's not going to last because your frame of reference is so narrow. You know?
Right.
So at a certain point, I started making things that represented what I would want the most. And that's actually a really good loop to be in, because I wouldn't want to make something that I wouldn't want to wear. And in the case of this watch, this started out as a piece unique rendering that I made. And Francois, the former CEO, liked it so much that he wanted to offer it to people. And I loved that. That was a huge compliment to me, because it meant that I was thinking like the brand might have been thinking.
But it's also a shift because it meant that you were also designing for other people.
Yeah.
Perhaps people that you knew, or most of them, or many of them you knew, but it wasn't just for you.
I don't know that I thought about other people in like human form, but I thought about the spirit of other people, the spirit of other people's excitement. You know, this watch is a very subtle shift in terms of what's different about the watch. The dial is different. The hand color is different. There's about 3 or 4 design elements that are different. The rest of it's very disciplined in saying the Royal Oak QP is a brilliant reference already. What would I do if I were thinking like the brand? If I worked at AP, what would I make? Not if I could have anything I wanted. Right? There's 2 ways to kind of customize something. One is from the outside in, which is what can I get away with? And one is from the inside out, which is what's the incremental thing that would feel as if I was almost thinking for the brand, wishing, almost intuiting to them what they should sell to me.
The dial is the thing that just sort of sucks you in like the Death Star when you first look at this thing.
Thank you, yeah.
That sort of 3D printed at the atomic level, then polished, then PVD coated in blue, gives this sublime kind of depth to something that is decidedly not classic.
Yeah. Here, I'll show it to you.
So this is the watch in question.
That's the watch in question. And when I first saw their rendering, when I saw AP's rendering, I thought, this is like looking straight up into the night sky, and these 4 subdials kind of appear from the heavens. And it really is like when you look down at your watch, you're looking up at the sky. And my favorite dials, I've said this before, are the ones you can't stop looking at.
And I'm right in assuming that the every facet of this sort of, I mean, there must be 1,000 facets on this surface, have been hand finished before it was PVD coated.
It's actually a stamped brass dial. So it's actually a stamp. As to whether it's been hand finished, I don't think it's been hand finished on the microscopic level. But what's interesting about it is that all of the crystals are kind of facing a different axis. So the play of light is extreme and really tight and kind of different under any light source. And that's what's really fun. It's very chameleon-like. It makes me want to...
That's amazing.
I have a lot of pictures on my phone, sort of like having a baby, and it's just all baby pictures in your phone.
Yeah.
I have a lot of baby pictures of this watch because I'm still trying to get the perfect iPhone pic, because it's one of those things. Sometimes I think if something is beautiful enough, it evades photography. And this is one of those watches that I think there's an extra 10 to 15% wow factor when you see it in person.
Well, of course, you're used to the watch world and journalists sort of commenting on your choices and your thoughts in terms of watches. What were you most expecting them to comment on, the dial or something else?
Them being...
People outside.
People looking at the dial.
Fans.
I think the dial. There's a lot you can do with the dial. that changes the entire feeling of a watch. That feels as if there's something between a skeletonized dial and just a solid dial, as if that dial has been punched out and there's another world underneath the case that you're able to look at. I mean, it feels like the farthest thing away from the hands of that watch behind it is a million light years away.
Yeah.
And those are the watches that always got me, like back in my drinking days, and they're far behind me. You ever stare at a dial while you're a little buzzed? You ever
It has been known.
you ever just go and use the loo, and people are knocking on the door because you're just staring at your dial, a little drunk, breathing a little hard through your nose, and you just keep staring at it, and you go, Like, I wanted to synthesize that without the whiskey. And
I think it's, what's fascinating is that the display of a perpetual calendar is by its nature is there's a lot of information to get across.
Yes.
And yet this very granular dial doesn't necessarily get in the way of it. And if anything, it throws the 4 subdials, including the moon phase, actually makes them easier to read.
Yeah.
How much work did you put into thinking about what does the week counter look like? How do you...
So I try to think about functionality, and I try to make design changes, not just I wanted to see it different, but what are the functional changes in a watch. So if you think about the watch dial, the visualization is the functionality for the most part, right? I mean, you're going to have hands, you're going to have numbers, but after that, the way in which you visually interact with the watch is the functionality. So for instance, the week indicator is usually a contrasting color to the rest of the watch. But by making it tonal blue, and this actually worked, you don't see it unless you want to. If I showed you the watch from here, you can kind of just see the time only. Yeah. So I wanted quick reference to the time. And if you wanted to know where you were in the year, you could do that. But you won't even see it if you're trying to find out right now it's 2:04. You don't even, it gets out of the way. The other thing, and there's lots of historical precedent for this, but for instance, Patek Philippe has a red number 4 on a leap year indicator. On the QP Royal Oak, there's a red 31, kind of indicate the end of the month. I always found the red to be a little stubborn, even if there was another dial color that didn't. It was almost as if the red was the part of the glass,
right?
And any other color would just still be whatever it had to be, and it would stay red. It wasn't. So the idea of
the idea that it was fixed in people's minds.
The FP Journe, I forgot which model it is, the Optimum, I think, it has a power reserve on it, and the power reserve, the empty indicator is red, regardless of whether it's a jade dial that's sage green,
right?
Or jade green. The red kind of sinks its teeth in and won't let go, and making it white was a way of taking away this kind of lopsided, asymmetrical draw to the red 31 on the right. I mean, if you've got 4 subdials that are laid out symmetrically and there's a red 31 on the right, it kind of makes it tip over to the right. So here was the most fun part of the whole thing, because people can get a different dial color and cool, but when you start getting into the DNA of the design and saying, can we make the 31 white? And since we do that, it's going to bleed into the 1. Can we change the orientation of the 31? So can we make the 31 smaller and step it down diagonally? And when the design of the watch started to go into the design team at AP in their inboxes, that's when it got really fun. So,
and was there a lot of c'est pas possible because it's never been done, or is it something that they embraced?
Here's what's interesting. It's a good question. Here's what's interesting in the watch world. If your request has merit, I think it's really intriguing. I don't think that it's always just going up against a big steel door of no. Because if you have a reasoning behind the request, I think designers and engineers go, right? Instead of make it purple.
Right.
If you go, I've always felt like this, that, and that, and therefore, if we could make that change, then it would eliminate that. I think that's the love language of designers,
Yeah, I think it's interesting because the question, I guess, is do you fall in love with a watch for its looks or its function or a bit of both? Or
The answer is yes.
right.
The answer is there is a very, very narrow window of something being perfect. Where if you get it, it's almost like a magnifying glass burning a hole in a piece of paper. If you get it in the right place and all of the energy is focused in the right place, you can create kind of a multiplier of what the elements are. It is like tuning in something like a rangefinder on a camera. If you get it perfectly in focus, then everything comes alive. And you get this thing that even people who love watches can't quite describe. You know, that's why the watch industry's editorial world is so exciting, because we're trying to put into words what these things feel like, you know. And I have conversations for days with friends of mine who love watches because we're just trying to put into words what we're seeing, you know. And so when, it's like a song, I hate to be overly metaphorical, but when the singer's voice sounds like the message they're singing and the music sounds emotionally like the words feel emotionally, that's when you get songs that really last. And so the idea of a dial that resembles the night sky on a perpetual calendar, which was designed off of the movement of the stars and the sun and the moon, it just agrees. The sportiness of a white gold case, it just all agrees. The tonal blue agrees. The absolute monochrome numbering, just all white. We love watches because when they're right, we are delighted. And to me, delight is like the X factor you can't quite explain. You know, we don't usually use the word delight very often, but that's all I care about now. It's like, even if you can't get your hands on the watch, which very few people can compared to who is looking at it, right? That's just a mathematical thing. Can you make someone kind of, hey, I like that. Can someone look at something, like I was saying before, and enjoy it without feeling upset they can't have it? That's what I want. I don't expect people to try to get the watch, but I think it's still worthwhile creating something special. And if you create something special enough, I think anyone who looks at it can go, yeah, I really like that, and move on about their day with a little half-cocked smile about something.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, though, that does a mechanical manifestation of the measuring of time mean something more than... Does time mean more seen on this watch than it does on your phone?
I think so. I think anybody would agree. Same way anybody would agree that vinyl sounds better. The question is, do you love music enough that you're interested in crossing that little delta in terms of all the stuff you have to get into and understand? I think there are still some people who say just get the time on your phone. But I also think when everything is becoming so automated, people are looking at their lives and going, if I don't individualize, and I'm not saying you have to buy this watch to individualize, but if I don't do something that expresses a curiosity or a pursuit outside of the normal channels that I'm in, I'm just going to upgrade my phone every time there's a new one. I'm just going to sign into an app and post on it when I don't really want to. And a lot of curiosity can be explored through things like watches, wine, art, music, anything, really. I mean, I know people who I've tried to get into bird watching. I couldn't get it to stick. You know, I'm always getting into something.
What was wrong with bird watching?
I got to the first page and it was describing the parts of the bird, and I said, I'm not interested in the parts of the bird.
But there is something, it's interesting when you say this sort of analog experience of you have a much more personal relationship because it's just between you and whatever that thing is.
Yeah, it belongs to
photography
you.
or watches or art. Or
I think there's a companionship in wearing a watch. I remember being a kid. The only thing I really had to my name was a watch. You want to see a kid flip out, give him a watch. Even if it's a little kid's watch, $15 kid's watch. They will never take it off. It's the first functional belonging that you can own, you know? And telling the time is always functional. Every second of the day, it is performing a function. It's useful every day. It's useful every second. I remember buying jackets more than pants because I knew you couldn't keep wearing the same pants every day, but you could wear the same jacket every day. People make fun of you if you wear the same pants every day. I don't know if you know this, but I do. You know why? Wear the same pants every day. If you wear the same jacket every day, no one's ever said to you, when are you going to change that jacket? You sound like a moron. And the thing about a watch is like this can be used every single day. It is useful. Now, we're talking about, and it's very important that as I talk about these things, people watching this don't go like, this guy's completely out of touch. You don't need a $180,000 watch. But people are allowed to have pursuits. People are allowed to celebrate things if they've gotten to a certain point in their life. And the people who love watches cannot be talked out of it. I never met a single person who, when they got into watches, got talked out of it by anyone. In a way, you're kind of screwed for life.
Right.
You know?
But I think also it's interesting that when you're talking about watches at the level, there is a certain responsibility in the relationship, particularly with something like a perpetual calendar, keeping it wound. This is a 40-hour power reserve. Do you wind yours every day, or
No.
do you reset them?
So I'll tell you how it's really funny. I'm going to tell you how collectors really do it. I'll tell you how collectors really do it. We do not wind our watches on automatic winders. I don't know a single watch collector who uses their automatic winder. It's almost like we're collectors. Collectors do not. If you're going to wear a perpetual calendar for a day, you don't have to set it. Set the time. But right now it could be New Year's Eve, 1968.
Yeah.
On the back of on the dial, but we don't really set the. Unless you're going to wear it for 4 days, 5 days, maybe I'd set it. You don't have to set it.
So it's not the fact of its time measurement, it's the possibility that it can, is what this is part
Yes.
of the deal.
I would also say this is the first time I'm thinking about it. You're making me think about it. If you love your watch and you know how to set it, and you're on good terms with it, you don't have to set it. Now, if you just got a QP, you should be setting it. I don't know why this makes sense, even though it sounds terribly elitist. At a certain point, if you know how to set it, you know how long it takes to set it. And if you're only going to wear it for a day or two, let it go. That's the super secret. People will not tell you that. Real collectors will not even set their perpetual calendars.
That's really interesting. Does that mean when you first got this watch or one of your previous ones, that you're kind of setting the alarm on your phone as time I kind of wound it?
No, I'll keep it. That's interesting too. You're really excavating these thoughts.
Sorry if this is painful.
No, this is awesome. The first month or so, I would probably keep it set. After a while, they become
like
old
looking
friends.
at your baby every 5 minutes.
They become old friends. You go, you're fine. Now, I believe I will always wear my collaboration with every last detail set correctly. It would just feel wrong if I didn't. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You brought some other watches. Are you interested in showing those, or do you want to stick to
I'll show a couple things. I told myself I wouldn't bring anything because when I bring watches to a table, it's a different show. But this is just to show you 3 watches, this being my collaboration being one of them. I'm going to show you the watch that kind of started the QP Royal Oak, the watch that really got it popular, and then the last iteration of that caliber. So this is a 654 late 80s. It's the second, you could probably say it's the third, you could probably say for 1 month they made a different one, but it's basically the second version of a QP Royal Oak. And they're very similar. It's the same layout. And that's the discipline that I love in any, like Porsche, the discipline of Porsche from year to year to year on the 911 is like, you watch it grow so slowly over, 60 years.
Yeah, and so many of the hallmarks of the Perpetual Calendar are there.
Yeah. And
in a very blonde yellow gold.
Very old kind of.
Old gold.
Old gold is bronzy. I really like it. And if you think back to that being late 80s, early 90s, we were alive then. Who was smart enough to be into that back in 1989 or 1990?
Well, if they were, they'd be laughing now, frankly.
Yeah, if you were living the kind of life where you looked at that You might be dead for other reasons, but I don't know. But this is what happens when you get into vintage watches, is you start to imagine what the lifestyle of the person who walked into the boutique and bought that must have been.
Did you buy this fairly recently, or was this one of the...
Pretty recent.
All right.
Yeah. As I get closer to the AP brand and the people there, I feel like it's a little more authentic or naturalistic to want to get in some of the earlier stuff, just to have them, especially if you have your own collaboration, and it makes a little more sense if you were interested in earlier versions of the QP to help augment the understanding or the collection of something that ends with that.
What's interesting is that, you know, often there are celebrations for the beginning of an introduction of a movement, but your special edition is a celebration of the swan song of that movement, which is being retired.
Yeah.
That's kind of crazy.
It's sort of a very floral way to announce a discontinuation. And you're right. Most
kind of, there's a bad news, but there's good news kind of way.
Well, it's celebrating something that with the beginning of this caliber, and I think it's based on, these two are different references, but very, very similar caliber-wise. The movements are very, very similar. There's one watch that I would put chronologically in between these two, and I think it's responsible for the desirability and the interest in QPs. The Royal Oak QP is the ceramic.
Ooh. Well, now this is a very different
So
kettle of fish.
AP isn't the first brand to make a ceramic watch. But when they did make a ceramic watch and they paired it with the QP movement, it was a sensation. And even I feel it. I think the ceramic QP is just in a world of its own. That watch, whether it's black, white, blue, is responsible for a lot of people in this world who would not have otherwise discovered a QP movement, wearing one and understanding it and appreciating it. Even if you bought that because someone else told you it was hot and you had to have it, you would still eventually get curious and go, what do these things do? And when you figured it out, you'd very kind of married to the watch after you discover like the space aginess of the ceramic. It's almost ultimate AP, right? Where they were originally taking rose gold and putting it on a rubber-clad strap. They're now taking the shape of well-known luxury watches and hewing them in these modern, composite materials that take away the kind of shimmery shimmery precious metal look of a watch and make it even more modern for people who don't sometimes relate to wearing something that's precious metal.
I think what's also fascinating about, white ceramic was one of the hardest colors. Every new ceramic color takes months and years of work because it's kind of like weird alchemy meets cooking to get those colors right.
It's got to be flawless, and it's got to be, can't be porous, can't crack. They can. They're strangely, like, ceramic's interesting. Like, I'm a knife collector as well. Ceramic is incredibly durable. It's like 100 times sharper than a steel knife, unless you were to cut into something and go like that. So dropping a ceramic watch could shatter it to pieces, or it could be one of the safest drops in the world, depending on what's the angle of impact. Should we try it?
Be my guest. I'm not going to do it.
Let's go outside. Let's give it a drop. It's like shooting someone in the ER. We're at the AP house. We'll fix it here.
But I think it's interesting because it does bring people in from a style, looks perspective.
Yes.
And then the functionality side of it is something that you grow with.
Same movement in this as is in this. Same exact movement. Totally different presentation of it. And I think for a new generation, ceramic is their precious metal. Gold. Sometimes we look at our parents' ways of signifying status and wealth as not the exact way we want to do it. And through great narrative, through great excitement, just seeing this represents value to people that in a lot of ways is greater than a precious metal to a certain generation, you know. And to me, I get excited about it because I've been collecting watches for years to wear something that swims upstream in the white really, really shows itself off. And it's a way of saying, I get it, I understand. It's, this would be one of my favorite APs, I think. That would be one of my
beautiful.
favorites.
I'm intrigued by, you were talking about, you know, engaging people in your role as a creative conduit.
Yeah.
But and also, as you've said, far beyond the people who are actually going to buy this watch.
Yeah.
There are people who are inspired by those kinds of
That's
watches.
right. I think we need to get to a place in this world where we are not insisting or suggesting that somebody have to get something. When it comes to high art, especially I have a guitar a 20th anniversary Martin guitar that's $18,500. That was made to celebrate 20 years of this model. And one of the ways you celebrate is by executing extremely high complication or ornamental work as a way to celebrate. I think what's hard in the social media hype era is showing people something that you don't expect them to buy, but just visually appreciate, as people figured out how to do that. I mean, this is the thing I think I want everyone to understand. When you look at a watch, sometimes the thing to take away from it is people figured out how to do that. More so than it is, I'm dumb if I can't get one. This is what I want to change if I can. Showing watches is not a way of holding it over anybody's head. There are pieces I would love to have that I'm never going to get. Everyone wants pieces they can't get. There are pieces I can't get, whether financially or just can't get them, they're gone, or I'd have to line up for them, and I maybe don't have a relationship with that brand enough to get it. I'd love to equalize the feeling inside you when you look at something so that you don't feel less than for not being able to get it, and just feel inspired from looking at it and going, wow, they figured out how to do that. For everything you see AP put in front of you, it represents thousands of hours of R&D to get it there. And if I can tell that story better because of my partnership with the brand, and in a way that I will never say something that I don't believe in, I think that's really important to say. It's not like I'm bought and paid for. I'm not showing 100 APs and these are the watches that led to this watch. You know? Whether my interest in watches or even just objectively AP's history of ending this caliber. So if I can find a way to excite people without frustrating them, this is what we've got to figure out in this industry: is how do you excite someone without frustrating them? How do you?
But I think that you know that also applies in terms of explaining what luxury is that it is problem solving elevated to its most elegant degree.
I don't even I know these are luxury. Don't let me for a minute try to rhetorically wiggle out of these not being luxury. I see them as engineering feats you might as well make look nice.
Right.
Engineering feats you might as well dress up. They don't represent luxury to me. The Loro Piana sweater that I think we're both wearing represents luxury to me. But I think there's something engineering based about these watches that, at least for me, I've always been connected with.
I think there was something very interesting you said at the round table in Milan when this watch was launched, was that you try to make yourself slower to judge things because of social media.
Yeah. I was thinking about this morning, lest you think it came to mind at this moment, that watch collecting 15 years ago was like Fight Club. Only the fighters were in it. It was in a basement. And now it is WBA boxing, where, yes, there are still fighters, but there's now arenas full of people watching. And, by the way, I love it. Don't change a thing. I love it when people get in the mix and write dumb stuff. They're just watches.
Yeah.
This is how people take a break. These things are not being written on a hammock on the beach. These things are written in short cigarette breaks at work.
Yeah.
And they're very fun and jovial for people to go, looks like a Hublot. It's like, you're having fun. You're jamming out. This is, let's play. But also, it doesn't. And I always say to people now, like, don't tell me what it looks like. Tell me what you think about it. Describe it. Don't just compare it. To say it looks like a Hublot is sort of a way of just taking a dump in a mailbox and walking away.
It's the slapstick version.
It doesn't go anywhere. It doesn't. The message doesn't go anywhere. I still get a kick out of it because I think it's hugely antagonizing and funny. This is a new development.
Because more and more people have come into it.
The people who are commenting on it can't. A lot of them can't get it. Well, now hold on a minute. That's kind of interesting, right? Because that would be like saying football should only be watched by other football players.
Yeah.
What right do you have to criticize Tom Brady if you've never thrown a ball? Oh, every right. It's a spectator sport. And I think we need to embrace that watches for a lot of people are a spectator sport. And it's fun to be caddy. It's more fun to be caddy than it is to say, let me give it a second. You should do both.
Right.
Also give it a second, but have fun and jam out. But what to your point, there's the familiar and there's the unexpected. And there's a balance between those two things. And if you can balance it, which doesn't mean in the middle, it means somewhere lopsided enough that you go like this, huh? As opposed to, no. What I really love is someone going, huh. Yeah. I think it's a lot. And then somewhere over the course of 2 or 3 days, they go, I got to have one. We do it with music all the time. We do it with fashion all the time. In fashion, anything can be carted down a runway. And the implication is, I'll learn to love it because this is the way it is. And then in watchmaking, sometimes we go, time out. I don't have a point of reference for this. And I go, great, because you're going to develop one. And then when you're done, you're going to know a little bit more about what you like and what you don't like, or what you thought you wouldn't like and now you did. Change your mind all you want. People are changing their mind constantly. And I love having my mind changed. I love when I say that's not for me. I see someone else wear it, and I go, I got to have it.
But it can take some people, a couple of years to get around to wanting to buy a watch because for most people, it's a big investment.
Yeah, that's right. Well, see, that's an interesting idea that when you see something that you like enough to say, I'll find you down the line. There are a few watches, I think, for people that could hold on for 5-10 years, but I think we kind of move on and
Well, there are other things coming in front,
Yes. Sometimes it takes 30 years for a watch to get interesting. And there are watches, there's Rolexes, there's day dates we're discovering now that we were like, this was made? This is incredible. Why didn't anyone talk about this?
But that is something quite unique about watchmaking, is it's such a long timeline.
Yeah.
For a lot of the big brands,
Yeah.
it's 150 years, 200 years.
Sometimes I buy the bombs. I'll be honest with you. Sometimes I buy the bombs because
you never know.
Yeah. You know what a bomb was when it came out? It was the Rolex Rainbow Daytona. And I went, I get what they're doing. I get it. And I had to be me to be able to wear it. Jay Leno could drive whatever car he wanted to. He could drive a 1929 fire truck, and you wouldn't make fun of him because his love of automobiles was well established. I knew that I could wear that rainbow because I love watches so much, and it's known that people would go, I get, he's showing off that Rolex did that. He bought something that he thought was exceedingly whimsical on a historical level. Right? Sometimes that's a way of maybe saying that it's not a bomb, it's exceedingly whimsical on a historical level. The Rolex puzzle dial. Exceedingly whimsical on a historical level. Is it a bomb? The Spider-Man. It's whimsical on a historical level, right?
Well, it's a bit like when your grandma decides to break dance at the wedding because you weren't expecting it. But you don't want to forget it.
And then 30 years later, you go, Granny had moves.
Yeah.
Yeah. All of this is what we decide to make it. And that is why people love watches. Some people can say, I'm calling that the Starbucks, and it sticks. Some people can say, you think that watch is BS? I'm going to wear it. I'm going to change all your minds. It's a community, crowdsourced culture that even people who don't have the watch can change the culture by their thoughts about it, naming it. making a joke about it. It's all in good fun. This is all bonus stuff in life. But for me to have some opportunity to express my instincts through product is probably the most exciting thing that's happened to me in 8 years, is to have a seat at the table. Not a big seat at the table, because very little needs to change. I mean, you hand most people the reins to give notes on something, and they'll just kill you with notes. My whole take on AP is, you guys are great to begin with. You know, a lot of people like to come in with the idea that they want to turn something on its nose. I love you for a reason. I think there's just ways to take advantage of narrative sometimes. What is a product? How can you explain? You don't want to tell someone how to feel, but you can put up little arrows, you know, put little arrows on the floor. And then if you do it well enough, they tell you how they feel about the thing, and it's exactly what you wrote in the copy that never got printed, right? Like, and I remember when we were putting this story together for this watch, I said, I don't want to make it too much about the night sky. I want to make it about vastness and depth and crystalline. Let other people see the sky. And
So it's more about a sort of night sky thing. Is more of an impressionistic version of it rather than a literal one.
I don't.
You see night skies on watch.
I don't want to tell you where to take it. And if you end up at night sky, great. And you probably do. I don't, you know, it also sometimes on with flat light looks like the surface of the ocean floor from miles above the, you know, not that would be the surface, the topography of the ocean floor kind of. And when people tell you how something makes you feel, how something makes them feel, and it was exactly what you had in mind, I think that's a pretty good indicator that you've designed something well. If it makes you think of what I wanted you to think of, then I've done my job. You know.
Do you think you have another in you?
Yes.
You didn't think about that.
Yes, I did.
I mean, I'm saying you didn't take
Not on
long
that
to
one.
answer. No, but I mean, I'm saying that you think there's a. Are you already thinking of another one?
Yes.
Okay.
I think that's part of the partnership, is that somewhere there's another product ahead. What interests me is how big is my name on it, because I think it could be cool for the name to get pushed back a little bit in the diorama of the whole thing. My name's not on that watch for a reason. It's on the watch box, but that's your watch, not my watch, you know? If you buy it, I had the same thing with my guitar. You know, the Fender Signature Stratocaster, up until the time mine came out, the signature was always on the front of the headstock. And I go, put it on the back, because people want to play their guitar, not my guitar. And so I felt the same way about this watch. It's your watch, not my watch. And so what I'm interested in the future is, how can I have a hand in designing these watches, or designing elements of these watches, right? Without ringing the bell every time. I mean, couldn't that be the ultimate sign of belonging? Is that
And faith. I mean, it comes back to that idea you're saying, like with fashion, you get to a certain point where it's less about the appearance because you know it.
It's less about the appearance of my involvement. And what if it was just in the ad copy?
Yeah.
What if it was not the ad copy, but what if it was just in the website description?
Yeah.
Designed in collaboration with John Mayer, comma, off you go.
Yeah.
You know, these aren't, I mean, maybe after the first one, they're not, nothing left to prove. Now, how much can you delight someone or intrigue them through the tiniest little parts? I mean, you think about, like, I'm gonna go for a really long pass here on metaphors. If you think about the intricacy of a movement, how can you have the intricacy of a narrative, of a release, of a story that makes you look at the watch and say, I gotta connect with that. I gotta get it on my wrist and do the thing that watch is making me feel like doing. You know, watches helped me get out of my hotel room in countries all around the world. They helped me make friends with people who know nothing about my music. They helped me have conversations with people I couldn't relate to otherwise. a place to put my ideas, a place to learn how to be judgmental in a constructive way, a place to learn about like discipline in design. And when you're young, God bless you, you want Sour Patch Kids. Mm-hmm. Get it. I love it. Like I say, like the varsity jacket with the 18 patches of all different design. Cool. You get to a certain age where you've seen things come and go and you only want the things that stay. Mm-hmm. And this watch is designed to stay. Like it's already kind of calculated in a way to stay. Mm-hmm. Yes, there are chances taken, but nothing that in the computer modeling of my brain could be looked at as so scintillating now that it faces a threat of a reversal.
Right.
You know?
And also, I mean, this one took more than 2 years to bring to
that was
fruition.
The longest secret I ever kept in my life.
So it's not something you're going to be like, well, next week I'm going to make a minute repeater.
No, and now I'm in the business of knowing things that other people won't know about for years. Which I guess I kind of did anyway with tours or bands. You know, I knew about Dead & Company 6 months before. I can keep a secret. And it's fun. I mean, there's enough stuff coming out in real time that people aren't that interested in what's coming 3 years.
Oh, well, I'm pretty sure they will be when the time comes to find out what you have next.
It's fun to be let into the building because there's trust involved in that. And trust right now, along with respect, but that they go together. Trust is like all the capital I really care about at this point. You know, when you're entrusted, it's the best. It's you know, my life has been changed in so many great ways, objectively, empirically. It's not going to change that much more, but the feeling of being entrusted to participate in creating things, that's the final frontier. You know, professionally, the final frontier is we get to play in the sandbox together. Occasionally. Also, I'm not telling you that, you know, I sit at the board meetings, but to be sort of a tiebreaker. Mm-hmm. I mean, there have been a couple times I've been asked my thoughts on something, and I gave my very authentic thoughts, and the two people asking me looked over me at each other and went, "What did we say?" So there's no wrong answers, but there are some right answers out there. Mm-hmm. If people ask you a question and you give your impression and it touches on something they'd already talked about, I think that happened enough times early enough on with AP that it was like, okay, dude, you know what's going on. And also, again, I can represent spectators, consumers, clients, whatever you want to call them. Because they're not wrong sometimes, but sometimes, you know, sometimes you go, listen, if it were the way you asked for it, you would have wanted it the other way. Because you just wanted to play. Right on. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
You can't just go up to anybody and say, give me your notes. It's a dangerous question to ask. Because you'll get these big notes and you'll go, so no longer Esquire and no longer a video shoot? You now want this to be something completely different than it is? And the thing about this watch I love is that it's borrowing AP's vocabulary to express something I would want them to express. That's really, really fun. It's really a little more fun than Make It Purple. Is can I borrow your sensibilities for a moment? Will you make this thing that I think you would have made at some point?
You're just making it a little early.
Making it a little earlier. Or thinking for you, like you, but like I would want you to, but not outside of where you already are. You know, or else I wouldn't have loved the brand, you know? People play music for me all the time. I go, yeah, it's great. Some people like to sit down and go, I know exactly what to change. It's like, you can't, we love these things as they are. This is from the late 80s. What's wrong with this? Nothing. It does not need notes, you know? And the rest of it is up to AP or any other brand to show us things that they've been working on for 3 years, be 3 years ahead of us, and we look at it and go, oh, you did that, and talk a bunch of nonsense about it. It's fun. And I think at first when people started to write really negative stuff, I was like, oh no, these brands are going to get upset. I don't think they get upset. I think they go, this is you rah-ing one thing or another, and it's fun.
How did you first get into this particular watch from AP?
My first QP was in 2015 when they relaunched the reference 5134. Did I do it right?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I believe that you don't need references until things get confusing. This is just the ceramic QP. Don't need a reference for it. Mm-hmm. The latest QP. You don't need a reference.
It's the sort of level below.
It's once it goes a level below and it needs to be differentiated. So it's 2015. And I walked into the boutique, picked up the rose gold QP, and I wore that one nonstop on the first Dead & Company tour in 2015. For years I wore that watch. And that woke me up to what else was going on in the past. And so I bought a 25654, the steel version of that, and started to wear that, appreciating it as the prior version of the watch I'd already had. And from there, I really clicked with what AP was doing. And I think right around 2017, 18, they started to hit this kind of golden era we're in now. Sometimes I'll be doing something and I'll be like, hey, just want to let you know, this is a golden era. It's nice sometimes. If you think you're on to something, you say, I think we're in a golden era. Mm-hmm. And I really do think we're in a golden era of AP. I'm in a bit of a golden era of being old enough to have some experience and young enough to still have some spark in wanting to do things. Mm. Don't ask me when my next record is, but I am more engaged in creating things than I was since my first album, my third album. I mean, it's a really cool place to be in my life. My ideas begin closer to being good than they ever had. They drop into, when you start having ideas and you get older, they start dropping in a little closer to the center.
Right.
As opposed
You're not
to
sort of swimming around.
No, they're pretty close now. They're pretty close. I can be wrong.
But they never bang on first time.
They can be. But they don't start so far away, nor are they confused with other competing ideas. Because to go back to what I said at the beginning, I know how a good idea makes me feel now.
So you're in the zone before you...
I'm in the zone.
Right.
Yeah. I'll still have a couple of stinkers, but I think I understand the anatomy of an interesting idea now and how to bring it to life in a really complete and efficient way and not be jumbled. Maybe I'm getting to the producer part of my life where it's not a mystery to me anymore.
Marvelous. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anyone ever tell you sometimes you look like Eric Clapton a little bit?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's why I don't wear round glasses. Yeah. But it does happen.
Yeah.
You sound like Alan Rickman, but you look like Eric Clapton. I was like...